Off the press, there's a handful of interesting news and roster moves that we need to catch up on over the course of the past week, plus some missing news that we need to talk about. On this week's episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show, we go over the latest news and notes from around the league, plus talk about our picks for this week's TFR Betting Challenge. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode 128 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thanks so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. With you each and every single week, I am Ryan Yee. With me is Matt Yee and Devin Andy Vanderpool. Not here on this episode. Getting called into work last minute. Does he know
I heard him.
This is his real job? Does he know?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I don't know if he does know that, but all I do know is that he was pouting, blaming Elon Musk about all the troubles, all the times he's getting called in at work. So, big tech ain't always the right way to go.
And you never know. Getting called on an evening instead of doing this podcast to go fix a garage door rather than come talk a little bit about fantasy rugby and the latest news. That does include a big time news announcement to Vandy's boys, the Utah Warriors.
That just speaks to how much of a hard worker Vandy is. That's why he worked hard in his job. He comes here, works hard on the podcast. He goes into the season for the fantasy MLR season and works hard to get that 500 finish. And, you got to give it to him.
You got to give it to him. He's a dad, has a lot of time that he carves out for us. So double dad, that is true. So, hey, lots to talk about, though, this episode, Maddie, and we'll get through it here without Vandy on this episode 128, but some fun and exciting stuff to talk about. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, got a whole bunch of news, roster moves to catch up on over the past week, and also a lack of missing, or I should say, some missing news that we're going to talk a little bit about and speculate about in terms of what may be coming down the line. So this episode is all about that. But Maddie, before we get into it, I guess got to ask you. We talked about Vandy. How are you doing, man? Still the off season. Fantasy football is in full swing. Our team is doing pretty good here in the Fantasy Ruckers Gridiron League that has some of our fantasy MLR members participating in fantasy football for the first time. Not too bad. Always a better week when you're winning, that's for sure. And we know that from the fantasy MLR circles.
Yeah, that is for sure. But winning in that one, losing in my other one, I don't know. It's we're okay. We're okay. We're getting through. We're just trying to make it through the offseason, get to the MLR 2025.
Yeah. And we're just counting down the days. I think I think a team announced a post not too long ago that we're like 3 months away from like the start of training camp or something like that, which is pretty crazy to think about because it does feel like the MLR season just ended. And yeah, a lot of things are expected to change, especially with all the moving parts that we do have that we'll talk about in this episode. But before we kind of get into it, I do want to give a shout out to some of the past episodes that we've had and some of the special guests that we've had. It's been a fun off season. Always every single off season we try to do our best to bring our viewers and listeners the best content possible, which includes getting to hear from some of the players from the MLR itself, including friends of the show Andrew Coe, Andrew Quatrin, most recently Brock Gallagher, James Dealey of MLR Stats, not a player but obviously a big time content creator for Major League Rugby. All that in the past handful of weeks that we've had this off season. So if you haven't already, go back onto our YouTube channel, go onto our podcast site wherever you get podcasts and scroll through there. They're all really good listens, provides really good insight into the league and other topics that we do talk about, ranging from international rugby to the league itself, to off the field stuff as well, and obviously fantasy MLR, of course. But again, all that stuff can be found on our YouTube channel for you to watch, and it's all bookmarked and chaptered through, so you can scroll through it, including our podcast as well. So gotta say, man, it's been fun talking to a lot of these guys about getting their perspective and everything that's going down.
It has been good with the events in the past month. It's always nice to get the player perspective, and we're a player show. We love seeing the players succeed and love hearing what the players have to say. So yeah, it's always good.
Always a player show. As former players ourselves, got to back the
Well,
players. So if you aren't already, give us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers. You'll be able to find all that content on our social pages, YouTube channel, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Helps us out here on the channel. Again, we're approaching, getting so close to that 100 number, and we'd love to get there. Just really, really cool to see how
magic.
far this has grown and the support that we've gotten from all of you out there. And we want to thank you for listening and being on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR, which has been a lot of fun. If you aren't on top of all that as well, you can join our Discord, the link down below. Got a fun community there. That's our main platform and how we communicate among all our fantasy league members. And also, we do have the fantasyruckers.com, the official platform for our fantasy MLR leagues here on the Fantasy Ruckers show. All right, I guess there's no time to waste, Matt. You want to get right into it?
No time to waste.
All right, let's get into some news and notes. I guess the first one that we got to talk about is probably the most recent as of the recording of this podcast, and a big time name is moving on to a next step of his career. And it's a familiar name that we've talked about on the show for quite some time in terms of a guy that's pretty fantasy relevant, had a little bit of kind of fantasy drama around him surrounding when he's starting, not starting with this team that you're pretty close with, Maddie, in terms of hopping on that hype train that is Nola Gold. And Rodney Iona has been announced is moving on from the Nola Gold. Not quite sure yet what his next chapter in his rugby career is going to be, but it does feel like the MLR is no more in terms of that. We shall see. But Rodney Iona, past 2 seasons, has been competing for the gold. Obviously, a big time name, Matt. You remember, I remember vividly when this was a name that was announced, and we were all hyped around it in terms of the skill level and fantasy impact that he could provide for fantasy managers. And to see him after what I would say two pretty successful years from a individual standpoint is now moving on from the gold.
Yeah, I think he's been very up and down in his MLR career. He's had flashes of really high moments for the Nola Gold, but also flashes where you kind of question of what the heck he's doing there. And I think he and his talents have kind of been, or his career in the MLR has just been riding the wave of the Nola Gold, which has
Mhm.
been frankly inconsistent a lot of the time. So, yeah, it will be sad to see him go. I think we loved watching him play. It was electric to watch. But we'll see if he stays in the MLR. Does he go to another team? Does he go overseas somewhere else? We will have to see.
And if you scroll through his stats, his fantasy MLR stats, it's kind of indicative to what you're talking about there, Matt, in terms of the roller coaster of the highs of the high being just so electric. And then obviously when Nola isn't playing and they're having those off weeks of just how much it hurts you in terms of if you are a Rodney Iona owner, right? You go back to 2023 in round four, had a high of 32.6 fantasy points with 117 meters gained, 2 tries, 8 tackles, and a breakdown steal in 2023 in that week four. But in that same season, had as low as 2.2 fantasy points. Then you go to the 2024 season in round four again. I guess he's just really good at that round 4 week. So 28.4 fantasy points for him there, but as low as 6.5 in week one. And this one was also turbulent because obviously there was sometimes where he was in the lineup, not in the lineup, so made it even harder. Where in 2023 it was a little bit more of a staple of him being in that NOLA lineup. But again, that's one fly half off the board that won't be available for fantasy managers to select from. But that does mean that there is a good chance for someone to step up in that role and should be very, very fantasy relevant with the NOLA Gold.
Yep, for sure. It'll be interesting to see. I think maybe Reese Botha is maybe a
Mhm.
guy that comes to mind, but we'll see whether they're a domestic fly half that's going to be coming in or an international one that they're going to be signing.
Yeah, we shall see. Rodney Iona finishing in 2024 with 122.6 fantasy points. The name that Maddie mentioned, Reese Botha, was a guy that was there, 79.7 fantasy points. And we did see glimpses of Dorian Jones as well for 5 weeks, who was actually pretty electric there. So should be interesting to see how they fill the departure of Rodney Iona from the Nola Gold. All right, moving on to another roster shakeup. I would say probably a bigger roster shakeup, and would love
Yep.
to get Vandy's perspective. We were texting back and forth in
Just
our group
kidding.
chat in terms of the impact this is going to have. And I think his reaction kind of summed it up the best when he was just like, oh my gosh, I guess it's the Michael Manson show now at this point. And it does appear like that if Michael Manson does return to the Utah Warriors.
Oh, it
But
seems like he is.
there was a Twitter announcement by the Utah Warriors that a handful of players are not returning to the Utah Warriors. And it was funny kind of how it was announced. They didn't list any of the names. They just had a
Nope.
picture that said "Thank you,
They
Warriors" and a
said you
bunch of the guys.
decide.
You figure out who the heck is
It's one of
leaving.
those scholastic books where you do the I Spy thing, and they said you decide.
Right,
You figure
exactly.
out who.
Pull out the pen and paper, start marking that list down. But lucky enough, we do have friend of the show, James Dealey of MLR Stats, to help us out here in his post. And he kind of lists out some of the guys that are among these players that are leaving. Big time names: Mika Cruze, Kayla McEnany, Thomas Tuavau, Nick Suchon, Kieran McLean, all among those that are not
And I'll
leaving.
add, and I'll add to that Paul Mullen,
Hmm.
Isaiah Crusay, Mika Cruze's brother. Obviously, you can't have one without the other. Franco Vandenberg, Noah Bain, Alessandra Pola, Johan Deitenberger, Jesse Hamilton, John Dupree, Robbie Povey, Lopeti Isaiah,
Pretty
Louis
close.
Conradi, and Hunga Havili. All guys not returning to the Warriors
So guys
next year.
that aren't touched, that we do the players by elimination. Michael Manson, if he's returning with Utah, will be there. He was obviously the highest fantasy point scoring player in the entire
Well,
MLR.
I don't see why if they knew they were leaving, why wouldn't they list them here? So I don't
Fair
see.
enough.
I have a
True.
feeling that
True.
this is maybe a good sign of who is staying. They've lost a lot of guys, so you can't lose much more. So uh, I feel like we have a good picture of who might be staying, unless obviously they get a contract somewhere else where it's paying more
Right. So
or
listing some
have
of those
higher opportunity.
so listing some of those guys, Michael Manson, again, top fantasy point scorer, allegedly, based on this information, should be returning 242.1 fantasy points. Joel Hodgson, been a staple of that. He should be returning. Frank Lahore should be in that conversation as well. But then you start getting into the guys that are leaving. So Kayla McEnany was the fourth highest point scorer for the Utah Warriors this past season, 137.6. Again, another kind of turbulent season. He has been a marquee fantasy player for fantasy managers before, especially as James Dealey has mentioned in how he's called it in terms of meter eaters. Kayla McEnany was kind of the marquee guy for that. And it seems like he's not returning, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Kieran McClay was a guy that was definitely adequate from the scrum half position, 93.1 fantasy points. Maddie, you mentioned that Kieran was a guy that you slotted or suggested to slot in lineups on a weekly and week out basis, 93.1 fantasy points for him. Thomas Tuavau, 92.1. Mika Cruze, 80.8. The list goes on and on. So I
Yeah.
guess what you can
Uh,
say is that this Utah Warriors team, outside of kind of your staple guys, Manson, Hodgson, Lahore, Nell, Mono, guys that have been key for you, those guys that are going to fill in the gaps, it's going to be interesting to see how they do that and who fits in those roles. It's going to be a
well,
brand new Utah Warriors team.
Yeah, it is. And they're losing a lot of key guys, but here's what I'll say, and I think that's something that's super interesting is you have to look at that balance of domestic versus international.
Mhm.
International guys, I think they're either going to another MLR team or they're going back home or to another league. Fine. The domestic guys, that's where I kind of start thinking that this gets a little bit interesting because now you have to think every domestic guy, if they're leaving their team, are they going to the anthem?
Sure.
It's kind of just a natural thought of is this anthem team about to get beefy? Now, I don't know. They could be going to another team. I know we're going to get to a guy who's going to another team out of that list as well. But the other thing is that does this kind of indicate what they might have gotten in this dispersal draft?
Mm,
Right? Because they're losing a lot of guys, you're losing a lot of big names. They must have had guys coming in through this dispersal draft, and they must have had to announce this now after the happening of the dispersal draft, knowing that they were going to have guys that they were announced to sign and replace these guys.
yeah.
So I think it'll be really interesting to see the signings that Utah makes. They've got a lot of shoes to fill. They've got a 15 that they got to fill. They got a 13, an 8, a 2, a 9 because I think Kieran McLean, I mean, yes, they have Zion going, but Kieran McLean was
Yeah.
the best 9 that they had. And they've got basically a guy almost in every position that is leaving. So, yeah, they definitely got a lot to fill, and I'll be interested to see what signings they are making throughout the rest of this offseason.
And there's a lot of interesting points you bring up there, Maddie. I mean, I think the most interesting is that anthem piece because I think that's going to be the talk of the town heading into this next season because of, again, the folding of the Dallas Jackals, a lot of domestic guys looking for a new home there. Again, we'll get to it in terms of the lack thereof news, in terms of we haven't heard anything about this dispersal draft yet, but how does
Yeah.
that play into it? How do these domestic guys from the Warriors now play into that? The Anthem team could look like a completely new team, which should be interesting again. Just another one of those
Yeah,
things to keep an eye
but
out for.
to be fair, like you look at their lineup and at least the back line, you look at it and it's decently still intact, right? So you
Sure.
got Joel Hodgson, Paul Asike, Joe Mano, Michael Manson.
Hmm.
You need a 15 and an outside center. Uh, so I mean, yes, they still, but they've got really still those core key guys that were huge for them in the past couple of years. So I don't think they'll be too bad, and I'm sure that they're going to get a lot of signings in here. We'll have to see, but there's going to be a 13 that they sign. There's going to be a 15 that they sign that I think is going to be very big on fantasy radars because of just the impact that they're going to have on this team.
And if I'm a Utah Warriors fan, I think the initial gut reaction, especially like hearing it from Vandy, was kind of like, "Oh my God, like here we go," right? Like it's shocking to hear this many people. But to your point, Maddie, about how some of those key guys still being there, um, remember this Utah Warriors team was only 5-11 last season with
Yeah.
the guys that they had, and I know a lot of injury played into that. Mono being injured at the start of the season, and a handful of other things happening within there. That this team, even with those guys that they had, was not necessarily a force to be reckoned with. I think the potential was always there. It was always electric to see some of these big time players, especially when you watched what Manson was able to do on the field, what Joe Mono was able to do last year, but they just have never lived to that potential that we talked about. So hey, change is a good thing, I think, and it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
To
Let me tell you who I'm maybe the guys that I'm actually worried or that if I was a Utah Warriors fan, I'd be sad to see go. Mika Cruz, Caleb
hmm
McEnany,
hmm
Kieran McLean.
hmm
Thomas Tuval, we've seen him fantasy wise. He's been average.
Right.
And frankly, I think sometimes watching him, he's quite average. And they have Dylan Nell. Nick Sushan, a guy who was a stud 2 years ago, comes into the Utah Warrior outfit and just doesn't really play up to his potential. So
Sure.
you look at some of these names, and I think it's a lot of names because of the volume, but really you're losing three key guys, I think. And that's what you'll be most choked up about, regardless of what other names on this list.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see where these guys kind of end up. Now, we do know where one of these guys is ending up, and that is Mika Cruz. It was announced not long after the announcement by the Utah Warriors that Mika Cruz was signing with the Seattle Seawolves. Eagle number
Wow.
548 is going out to the West Coast to join a team
Staying
that
on the
is
West Coast.
already pretty stacked. And now they add some depth into that spot in a back line in a center area that is already pretty stout with Devon Rousseau, with Dan Creel. Now you throw in Mika Cruz in there as
No way
well.
they have them all. Not a
Um,
chance.
so is that, I guess that's the question, Maddie. Do you
There's
think
no way
that
they have them
this
all.
this is an indicator that probably one of those guys that we saw as a staple last year is probably not there? I mean, and then also what, Tavit Lopetti,
I,
right?
I mean, look, like Johnny, is he back? Let's say no. Let's say no, just for, and they have Tavit Petty, Dan Creel, Devon Rousseau. Honestly, I'd much rather him at 15
Sure.
anyways. Uh, and Tavit Petty, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think this, what I do know is that Seattle Seawolves, this team is looking to be very stacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we're going to find out more from this dispersal draft results
Hmm.
whenever it gets released. But this team is looking to be very stacked. Uh, you got to remember that these guys are finalists last year,
Right. Right.
who came very close and had a great season, and now they're adding one of the best players on that Utah Warrior team, Mika Cruz.
Right.
So pretty
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, again, Mika Cruz, in and out of the lineup for the Utah Warriors, but when he was on, he did pretty solid. His best performance in round six, at least from a fantasy perspective, with
Oh,
18.7 fantasy points, 63 meters gain, a try and a try assist. Again, it'll be interesting to see how that moves. But you list out those names
what?
there, Maddie.
Yeah.
It's
But
crazy.
what I'll say is that fantasy wise, something that we always have to be worried about, and we've seen this happen in the past, is that when teams have really deep rosters, you start to have to now worry about playing
Hmm.
time.
It's true.
You have to worry about who's going to be in the lineup. I think Mika Cruz gets an advantage because he has that domestic eligibility.
Hmm.
So he's obviously going to have to be kind of a spot that allows them to reach that domestic player quota.
Hmm.
But you look at some of the other guys and you think, okay, how does this play out in the Seattle lineup? And this is kind of the start of Mika Kruse entering a very deep center room. Once we see the rosters and understand the rosters, we're gonna have to figure out as fantasy managers who's gonna be playing here, who's gonna be starting.
And again, this is where that begins, right, Maddie? It's like the picture, right, starts to mold now. When we start seeing these roster moves starting to happen, especially when the dispersal draft results get released and we see kind of the shakeup from that, this is where us as fantasy managers can start creating that picture and mold in our mind in terms of what that opportunity looks like for different players on different teams and kind of what that roster looks like. And that is going to have a huge effect on what their fantasy value is. Again, from a rugby standpoint, and from a Seattle Seawolves standpoint, this is a fantastic addition because this only makes them better and better and more deep, which we've heard went from the players on this podcast who are in the league on how important depth is when it comes to the grueling season that is MLR. But from a fantasy perspective, you make a great point there, Maddie, that opportunity is king oftentimes during the fantasy season when it comes to being able to rely on consistent performances week in and week out. And this might hurt that. I guess before we move on, my last question about this then is, do you think this move is Kruse more or less valuable than what he was on the Warriors now that he's on Seawolves?
I think it'll be really tough to tell until we understand who's actually in there. I think this makes him. I think he maintains the same value. I mean, you look at how much he played last year. Like he didn't play that much last year,
Sure.
right? And I know that there's, I think, some injuries sprinkled in there, but also like that backline, that Utah backline is really good.
Right.
So I think a little bit less. We'll see. We'll see. I have a tough time with this one just because it's kind of like last year where I was like, I just don't understand and everybody can't have the ball.
Right.
Everybody can't have an impact. There's going to be guys in that backline that's going to have more impact than the other. And yeah, so kind of a cop out answer, but yeah, that's my thought there.
Yeah, it should be interesting. We'll see. Again, molding that picture and trying to figure out where that opportunity is going to lie and figuring that out, making the determination on your own. Do you think Mika Kruse slots in this lineup and has that opportunity? It is to be determined, and we'll find out more as we kind of see more of these rosters shaken out here. Just a couple things now that I want to get to before we get on to a little bit of a dispersal draft conversation is just some front office moves that have happened, which I think is always a good indication of some of these teams continuing their stability, especially after the shocking news of the Dallas departure. So like to kind of sprinkle this in, but Los Angeles has announced the hiring of former Wallabies forward Steve Hoyles.
Yep.
As director of rugby for 2025 and 26. We love the long term in quotes, but anything longer than a year contract is always reassuring for us. But this is a guy that has pedigree, not only in the rugby world, but in the MLR world. He was a Giltini's forwards coach and defense coach. He lifted the shield in 21 and was their head coach in 2022. He is now returning to the United States after coaching Randwick to the Shoot Shield in 2023. So a guy that has lots of experience, has been the MLR before. You love to hear these types of announcements. I think it's a good sign for the league.
No, I think it's good. I think when you're able to attract coaches, that means that you're also going to be able to attract players.
Right.
We've seen that throughout the league. I think a perfect example is kind of Dylan Nell. You bring in executive front office guys with connections, they draw players into the league, and you see them shine.
Very true. And then a couple other ones, this in the Chicago Hounds front office in terms of their coaching framework. They've actually brought in a familiar name, a name that Toronto Arrows fans will be familiar with, and that is Noel Reid, who joins from the Arrows Academy and was a player on there, now moving as the backs coach for the Chicago Hounds.
Give some insider knowledge here, but maybe he's coming from Arrows Academy, but he is coming from the homebred Markham Irish Rugby Football Club, coaching that team up to, I believe, a Marshall Championship. So Division 2, because they stunk the past few years. Championship. Noel Reid coming off in a successful season with the Markham Irish, moving on to bigger and better things with Chicago Hounds. I mean, classic. He goes from the Markham Irish to a very Irish community under an Irish co-owner of Dave Carney. as an Irish man
Yeah.
to coach the Chicago Hounds as a backs coach there. So that's the natural progression. I mean, after you coach the Irish, the only next step is up.
Well, there was some inkling that Kearney was actually spotted in Toronto. So there is thoughts that maybe he was there to kind of finalize this deal with Noel Reid to get him in as backs coach. Hey, well, whenever we get a chance to shout out the Markham Irish, that's Maddie and myself's former youth club. They're the same club that Andrew Coe used to play for before he moved on to bigger and better things. And yeah, it's cool to see them kind of on the up and up and finally back in the Marshall Premiership to compete for that
Yeah,
McCormick Cup there.
they're gonna suck next year.
We'll see. We'll see. And then lastly, Ford's coach of the Chicago Hounds has been announced is Todd Dammers, who joins from Brisbane Boys College in New Zealand, where he served as the director of rugby. So a couple movement options there. I was going to bring this on for Vandy here as some news. Not that anyone does care that is listening, but it was announced by the Houston SaberCats they're holding U18 tryouts. I was thinking we could have done a whole bad news Bears thing and getting Vandy to fake his birth certificate, and we
Oh
could have
yeah,
sent him down to Houston to try out for their U18 academy. You think that would have
bad
worked?
news Bears. You mean bench
Or
warmers?
bench warmers? Yes, bench warmers. That's what I meant.
Yeah, Vandy is 12. So yeah, I think it'll work. I think it'll
It
work.
could have
So
worked.
we'll
We'll
send him
see.
down there, and he'll be on the what's it called, the absolute wagon or whatever, the buzz saw of the
Yeah.
Houston SaberCats in no time.
Yeah. I think the best content would be to like strap a GoPro to him and see how he survives a U18 training camp session.
Good luck.
That'd be quite funny. All right, let's get to the biggest conversation, Maddie. And I mentioned that at the top and tease ahead. And there's no real new developments here, but I do want to just have this conversation because I think this is what people are talking about and what people are waiting for the most. And that is the missing news of where this conversation of the dispersal draft is. We had Brock Gallagher on 2 episodes ago that confirmed, allegedly for him, that, and there's no reason to not believe him, was that the dispersal draft happened 2 weeks ago on Wednesday, at the tail end of September. Now, since then, 2 weeks later, we have no news. And the latest announcement from MLR was when they announced that the Dallas Jackals were folding, and they said there would be news to come in terms of how this dispersal draft would operate and what the fallout of that would be. On from our sources. Again, the dispersal draft has happened. The results are there. They just haven't been shared with the public. What do you make of this, Maddie?
Yeah,
It's interesting that it's taking this long for things to get finalized. I'm not sure if it's a team thing. I'm not sure if it's a league thing.
I
What do you
think
possibly think?
I think what's likely happening is that guys get drafted, but then they're waiting for guys to sign.
Hmm.
They're probably waiting for at least, majority of the guys to sign so that they can announce it. And it's not like they announce the draft and it's going to be like guys are just going to be changing teams.
Hmm.
Frankly, I don't even expect them to announce the draft or expect them to announce the orders. I think teams are just going to come out with the signings. I think we're going to have to rely on guys like Jam Delay, guys like Brian Ray, guys like Doug Coyle, these guys to provide us with the information of the dispersal draft. But outside of that, I don't think we're going to get anything from the league that's going to say, hey, this is what happened in the dispersal draft, and these are how the guys got selected. I think we're going to be looking at AmericaRugbyNews.com and just basically sifting through whatever they provide us. So, yeah, I don't really expect it. I think there will just be a day where these guys with the sources will just say, yeah, we're just going to release these now.
And that's how we found it out last time in terms of results. It was posted.
Yep.
Brian Ray did post it when it was the folding of the Iron Workers and the Arrows when that dispersal draft happened in terms of how that result came out. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I think. And it was interesting kind of going through the comments. I think, again, our Brock Gallagher interview got a lot of traction and a lot of people tuned in for that because he provided a lot of really, really good insight into the behind the scenes of what happened and kind of how things are playing out right now for a player. And I think what people need to remember and seeing some of the comments is that they call this the dispersal draft, but in conventional sake, this is not really a draft, right? Like they call it to kind of fit under that North American sports brand, but from all the players that we've talked to, it's more of a signing period that's kind of announced in a draft format that isn't conventional in a sense. So all those rules that you would think that comes with a draft in terms of people being selected and going that way, it's not really in that framework per se.
Yeah.
Again, I think there are people that are trying to negotiate contracts. There are people that had kind of already spoken with teams that were confirming them to get drafted and things like that. Again, this is not a your conventional draft in that you think in the conventional sense of the North American sports scene. So we'll find out. And again, it is interesting that we haven't heard anything from anyone, whether it's the league or any of those people that are connected in those behind the scenes rooms in terms of what is the fallout from this that allegedly happened 2 weeks ago. What we can say from our sources is that it has happened and there are results of people being selected to certain teams. We just don't know those players and aren't confirmed in terms of if those are true in terms of the players that are out. So keep your eyes peeled. Follow socials. I'm sure we'll be talking about it and we'll have it out as soon as there is. But we kind of alluded to it that there is going to be this picture that you're going to be creating as we continue through this offseason, as you start working on your 2025 fantasy MLR prep in terms of the value that certain players are going to have. This is going to be, if not the biggest thing that's going to have the impact on that, it's going to be one of the biggest things. So keep your eyes peeled, see what happens, because I think there's going to be a lot of big names that go to interesting places that could have a huge impact.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
All right. Let's move on. We haven't had it in a while, but it is time to do a little bit of housekeeping.
What the heck? This wasn't on the rundown. We're not supposed to do this.
Hear ye, hear ye.
What housekeeping?
Hear ye, hear ye.
Well, hear ye, hear ye. Here is Supreme Commissioner Yee with a Fantasy Ruckers Leagues update. Not in the rundown, but a couple things that we do need to get out of the way, Maddie, in terms of spurring up the conversation of Fantasy MLR. Like we said, the chatter is starting to be out there in terms of some of these offseason moves happening. Off-season training or the preseason training is not too far away. It's going to approach a lot quicker than you think. So I'm calling out and doing a call to action to all of our current league members and community members and people in our Discord and people who follow us and people who watch this podcast and listen to this podcast to start spreading the word about Fantasy MLR. We'll obviously do our due diligence and posting on Reddit, posting on our Discord, posting on socials on when people can join, but let's get people prepared for everything they need to do. Have them join the Discord, have them follow us on social if they're interested in playing Fantasy MLR. Again, at the Fantasy Ruckers, link down below for the Discord. I want to start this call to action nice and early so that we can get as many people joining the Fantasy MLR wave as possible when the new season comes along. So starting the chatter now. Again, all of our big time community members, go out there, start talking about it, start getting people involved, people who have played fantasy before, that don't know about rugby, or people that know rugby that haven't played fantasy before. Whatever it may be, let's get the conversation going, and let's spur up some interest here for Fantasy MLR in 2025. Lastly, just want to say we are having our Fantasy Ruckers meeting among our team members, including some of the familiar names that you've heard on this podcast. Obviously, myself, Maddie, Vandy, but also our website guru, Alistair Kirsch-Poole, our analyst guru, that is Nicholas Johnson, and our community moderator, that is Stephen Lowen. We'll be meeting soon to start working out logistics and fine-tuning the things that we're going to be implementing for this upcoming season. So again, this is your last chance. Fill out that questionnaire if you can. We're going to be using a lot of that feedback to implement and mold what we think needs to come up this upcoming season. That link is down below. You can find that on all our socials. It's a lot of help, and we appreciate you taking the 5 minutes to do that and to make this Fantasy MLR thing even better. That was okay housekeeping, right, Maddie? That was worth it? Worth it to go through the trumpets? No comment. No comment. All right, I'll take that. Anyways, you ready to go to our final segment of the show? Nice quick one here, Maddie.
You know how I feel about the trumpets.
Yeah.
Especially after you started self-proclaiming yourself.
Hey, I called the Supreme Commissioner Yee. We confirmed it last episode with James Dealey. He is now the godfather of MLR stats. This is great. We're just giving everyone names.
I agree with the second part. The former, let's figure it out.
So, you ready to get to our last segment of the show, Maddie?
Let's do it. Big dubs.
All right, let's go. Big dubs this week. We are entering our fantasy Ruckers betting challenge. This is Devin's Degenerate Dambles, brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp betting made easy. Again, we partnered with Betstamp to start this TFR betting challenge to give a crack at wagering in the world of rugby, especially during the offseason when we don't have MLR. Give Vandy a little bit of a taste of the rugby world outside of MLR because we know he is a degenerate gambler at best.
He
So we brought
sure
to you by
is.
Betstamp. We've partnered with Betstamp to do that. And in part of this segment, we've given all of our viewers and listeners and supporters a chance to get the best new user deals on the sports books available in your area. The link is down below. And again, it's a super cool signupexpert.com/the fantasy ruckers. It takes you to a page, geolocates where you are, and puts it all in one spot. All the sports books that are available. You'll find ones that you didn't even know were there. I just found out that Fanatics Sportsbook just started in Pennsylvania through the signupexpert.com. You'll find out sportsbooks. They're popping up everywhere. And the best place to do that, again, is using that link down below. You get those new user deals. You sign up for new sportsbooks in your area. You get some free bets. You win some money like we did this week. And you have a little bit of
Hmm.
fun while doing it as well. So let's talk about our Fantasy Ruckers betting challenge. I'm on I don't, I'm grasping by the straws here, Maddie, in terms of staying alive here in this betting challenge. It was looking good for me at the start, was making some big time wins. Then the last 2 weeks of the rugby championship, which I thought were as close of a lock in for some of these bets as it could have been, ended up being not the case. And I lost a whole bunch of
Well,
money
that's
during
rugby.
that period of time. But it looks like Vandy has been on the completely other way. So last week,
Congrats.
we put in some bets. Vandy is leading in the challenge right now. Vandy took your advice last week and bet on counties in the NPC Bunnings to
Spread.
lose by more than what was it, 17 and a half? Was that the spread, I think?
That was.
17 and a half to who did they play? It was do you remember?
Nope.
Know this. I should know this. I should know.
I think
Let
it
me
was
pull it.
counties versus like Tasman or something.
Yes. Anyway, so there was the bet last week in terms of that. County picking in that 17 and a half spread. I went interesting. So Vandy got that. He put a whole because he has a whole payroll to work from now with as much money as he has. He put down oh,
No, it's
it was
counties versus
counties,
Manawatu.
Manawatu,
Yeah, because
Manawatu.
Manawatu stinks.
Right. So Vandy picked counties, put $10 on that. They covered the 17 and a half spread. He won about $8 this past week. For me, I went a little bit interesting here, included that counties pick that you suggested, but I also went with a Leicester money line over the Newcastle Falcons in the Premiership. Partnered that up. I only had $5 to play with. I wanted to play a little bit safe. I probably should have just went balls to the wall here and put it all down. But I went $2 to win, double my money there, got 280 back. So we're approaching back up. So in the payroll right
You know what?
now, I got 780 left in the bank. Vandy
Well,
is up to
I got a good one for you.
38.68.
Wow.
And
I got a good
now,
one for Vandy too.
yeah. All right. So we'll see into this. All right. Let's do it the same
Hey,
way we've been doing it,
so
Maddie,
yep.
before you get into
Before
it.
you get in, no. Before you get into it,
Okay.
NPC Bunnies Cup regular season's over. We're
Okay.
into playoffs now.
Okay.
Just FYI,
Okay. That's good to know.
playoff rugby and FYI, November test series start in November, which means that there might be some of the All Blacks coming back and playing for their squads. Just FYI.
All right.
For
That's
example, Mark Talia played for North Harbor on the weekend.
okay. That's good to know. That's why we
David
keep
Havili played for Tasman.
That's why we keep you around, Maddie. All right.
Cam Roygard made his comeback with counties. Anyway,
So
yes.
these are the things that I'm looking at.
Okay.
I think I'm riding the train of your whole crappy teams thing because last week it worked very well for me in my parlay. So
Well,
in the Premiership, we'll start off with
screw the permission.
I'm looking at whoever plays the Newcastle Falcons.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got sale this week.
What do you think the line is for that?
Oh, it's got to be at least what, like 15?
We'll see if
Gotta be
this change
15, right?
we'll see if this changes your mindset on this pick. The line is 20 and a half.
No, don't do spread there.
So
I've got an
Sale
I've got
is
an
favored
idea
by
here.
20 and a half points.
Ryan, I've got a crazy idea here, and I need you to build this up.
Okay.
We can't go. I need you to build this up, and you need to tell me what it looks like.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We're mixing up leagues here.
Okay. So,
Okay.
which league we starting off with?
I mean, we're gonna do a parlay with all of them. We're
Okay.
doing URC and we're doing Premiership. Let's
Okay. We
try
got a
this
little bit
out.
of everything. All right. Let's do
I
it.
think I got this, Ryan. I think this is a way that you can put in $3
And
and you
win a
can win
bunch.
10.
Okay.
All
All right.
right. All
You're
right.
getting
We're
me
gonna do
excited.
money line sale over Newcastle. That's the first one.
Okay. Hold on. Let me do something here. All right. So you got Sale over Newcastle money line.
Yep.
Let me tell you the odds in
No, I
that
don't.
one.
It's gonna be crazy because it's gonna be like the obviously Sale is favored by a lot.
Okay. So the
All
money
right.
line for that, just to put in perspective, Sale is minus 1,200 favorites in
Yeah.
that.
Fine.
Not great.
Fine. Switching over to the URC.
Okay.
Okay. We're gonna go Sharks over Benetton.
Sharks over Benetton. Okay. What do you think the line is for that?
That's got to be at least minus 600.
So no, what do you think the point spread is on that?
Like 12.
For in favor of who?
Sharks.
Sharks are plus 2.5 underdogs.
Whoa.
The Sharks are plus 120 against
Hey,
Benetton.
remove that one. Remove that money line there. Stormers over Edinburgh. Add that to the parlay.
All right. What do you think the line is on that one?
Oh, that one's got to be at least 7.5.
No, Stormers are 3.5 underdogs.
What? This is nuts.
So by your line of doing that, there, if you are confident that the Sharks and the Stormers are gonna win this weekend, you could put a nice little parlay there that's gonna win you a whole bunch of money by just the
Right.
money
And
line
then,
there.
well, I mean, I even got one more Lions over the Dragons.
Okay, Lions are favorites in that one. Lions are 7.5 favorites in that one.
Yeah.
So
What do we got there? What are the
so
odds for
if
that
you
parlay?
if you so you want me to pick money line for Lions?
Money line, all of them.
Okay, money line
Yeah.
Lions. Okay. So that's you bet 5, you win $36. And
Holy.
that's without including your NPC pick. So let me put the MP or not the NPC, the
Nah, we got
Premiership pick.
nothing.
The Premiership
Oh,
pick, the
okay.
Premiership pick.
Add the Premiership
I'll
pick.
put in the Sale Sharks. So bet 5, win almost basically $40.
Holy. Ryan, if you want to go big, that's just what I'm
What
saying.
concerns me is that you are so confident, or maybe this shouldn't concern me. Maybe this should, and this is
I don't
like
understand how the
going it
heck the
into
Sharks are
blind.
underdogs there. What the heck's up with that?
Sharks and Stormers, you were confident that they were the favorites by quite a margin, and they are underdogs.
Doesn't
It's
make sense to
basically a
me.
pick 'em by 2 points, but all right.
Doesn't quite make sense to me.
All right. Well, you get back to me, but that's your underdog picks there. Stormers and Lions.
I mean, right.
Or
I
Stormers
mean,
and Sharks.
if you put $2 on that, what is that? $15 right there?
$2, $15. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, that's all I got. I mean, the Sharks, yes, they lost to Connacht, but I think Connacht is a decent side. Stormers, yes, they lost to the Ospreys, but again, I think the Ospreys are a decent side. I think they're all better than Benetton and Edinburgh.
All right. All right. I guess we'll see. Out of those ones, which one are you most confident in?
Glasgow.
Wait, what? Oh, wait,
Yeah.
what? Glasgow?
You didn't have Glasgow over Zebra? Oh wait, sorry.
No.
That's a Friday match. That's a Friday match.
Yeah, no, that's
I'm
fine.
obviously I'm the most confident in the Lions.
Okay.
I'm the most confident in Sale. So I think if you want to feel a bit more comfortable and you're not wanting to go as risky, you do a parlay of the
No, I'm
Lions,
putting this parlay in.
Lions and Sale Sharks.
Okay, if you do Lions and Sale, it's not great odds. So I think I got to go all in with what you're saying here.
I think you got to at least do one of them, one of the underdogs.
Yeah.
Ryan, you're asking me which underdog I feel most confident in.
Yes.
It's probably the Sharks over Benetton.
Okay.
I mean Treviso, but I think they got
And you're
Malachi
just going,
Fekitoa.
just go in it, right? Like, don't flake out here and go with the 2.5 spread. Like, get the odds here of Sharks winning this thing.
Just take the win.
Take the win. All right. All right. So there you go. So Maddie's got Sharks over Benetton.
What happens, Ryan? What happens if you do Sharks, Sale, and Lions money line?
Sharks, Lions,
Sale, and then
and
Sale.
Sale in the Premiership.
Gotta be okay. 2, maybe get 10.
2 get 6.
Okay.
It was like,
I think you should go big.
yeah.
I
I think at this point we got to go big. But all right. Well, there's Maddie's picks there. You got Sharks money line at plus 120, Lions money line over Gwent Dragons at minus 275. He's also got the final. Let me just pull it up in the URC. The Stormers over Edinburgh as
Edinburgh.
as
Yep.
plus 140.
And then in 2 weeks, I'll be back in my bread and butter NPC Bunnies Cup.
NPC buyings. You don't. Yeah, I guess.
Get some playoff rugby.
Yeah, I guess we shall see. All right. Well, hey, that is the TFR betting challenge brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp betting made easy.
Whooping your butt.
Yeah, we'll get back into it. I think we need a big win like this.
Hey, we know who the degenerate is here. But if
There's
you
a
make
reason.
this bet, Ryan, if you make this bet, Ryan, we're gonna have to rethink about who actually is the degenerate here, because that's a pretty big parlay.
That is. All right. Yeah, we shall see. We shall see. There's going to be a whole lot of sweating come this weekend if that's the parlay that I go on. But I think I might. I got to go big or go home, right? I'm losing big time right now, so we got to catch up at some point. Anyways, Maddie, I mean, whole bunch of news in this one. Again, we'll see. Message to all the people: keep your eyes peeled, especially for fantasy managers, in terms of what announcements are going to be coming down the pipeline over the next couple weeks. Can't promise it's going to be by the next time we have an episode, but there is news that is looming that is going to have a big impact on the world of fantasy MLR. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled for all of that. And yeah, start talking about fantasy MLR 2025, because it's going to come fast. And you know what? There's going to be a whole lot of changes that we're going to be implementing to make it even better for all you people. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Matt, you have anything else you want to add?
I got absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. All right. A whole bunch more special guests coming up here the rest of the off season. Again, make sure you subscribe to be first in the know when all that comes down. Vandy will hopefully be back next week. We, of course, will be back next week. And again, having a lot of fun, kind of making the best of what is an off season without fantasy MLR around, with some of the fun guests that we've been having. All right, Maddie, you good to go?
I'm good to go.
All right. For Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I am Ryan Yee, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Utah Hockey Club.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.